You hear the screaming before you see them. It cuts through the smoke and ash, through the metallic temps of blood still fresh on cobblestones, through your own ragged breathing as you press yourself against cold stone. Then the soldiers appear, moving with an efficiency that makes your skin crawl. They're not hunting warriors anymore. Those men are already dead, their bodies still warm on the ground where Rome's legions left them. No, these centurions are searching for something far more valuable to an empire that conquers, not just with swords, but with calculated cruelty. They're hunting the women. And what they'll do next isn't chaos or rage, it's policy. Before we go deeper into this darkness, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I'm constantly amazed that stories this brutal, this human, connect with people across every continent and century. The year is 70 CE, and Jerusalem is dying. The siege has lasted 5 months. General Titus and 4 Roman legions have methodically dismantled one of the ancient world's most fortified cities. Not just to win a battle, but to send a message that will echo through generations. The Jewish rebellion, which began 4 years earlier with hope and righteous fury, is ending in systematic annihilation. But the true horror isn't happening on the battlefield anymore. It's happening in the smoking ruins where women hide with their children. In underground chambers where wives of rebel commanders clutch their infants, believing somehow that Roman soldiers might show mercy. They won't. Because what Rome is about to do to these women isn't the random brutality of soldiers drunk on victory. It's an intricate machine of human destruction, refined over centuries, documented in military manuals, celebrated in poetry, and woven so deeply into Roman imperial strategy that it has a technical classification in Roman law. These women, these wives of defeated warriors, are about to be transformed into something Rome calls captivity bellicae, public spoils of war, and the system designed to process them operates with such cold efficiency that it reveals something terrifying about how empires actually work. Her name was Deborah Bat Elazar. We know this from fragments, from the kinds of details that survive in unexpected places, scratched onto pottery, whispered into historical accounts by witnesses who couldn't unsee what they saw. She was maybe 23 wife to a rebel commander who died defending the Temple Mount, mother to a daughter barely 2 years old, and pregnant with her second child. Her family had served as priests for generations, which meant she could read Hebrew and Aramaic, could recite Torah, carried herself with the dignity of someone who understood her place in an ancient covenant with God. By sunset on the day Roman soldiers dragged her from her hiding place, none of that would matter. She would become merchandise, a commodity to be cataloged, transported, and sold to the highest bidder in slave markets that stretched from Caesarea to Alexandria to Rome itself. Her daughter would be torn from her arms and processed separately because children under 3 commanded different prices in different markets. Her unborn child would be noted in the inventory ledger as increased value. And her name, her identity, everything that made her Deborah, would be systematically erased and replaced with something that made her easier to sell. They called her the red-haired one. That's what she became to Rome. But here's what makes this story so much darker than simple wartime atrocity. This wasn't happening because Roman soldiers lost control. It was happening because they had control. Perfect, practiced, terrifying control. Archaeological excavations in Jerusalem's destruction layers reveal something that should chill anyone who looks closely at the evidence. Female skeletons found in the burned remains of the upper city don't show the random trauma of chaotic violence. They show specific injury patterns, deliberate wounds designed to incapacitate but not kill, to make running impossible while preserving what Roman accountants called market integrity. The positioning of these remains suggests organized processing stations. Women weren't just captured, they were examined, sorted by age and physical condition, documented in registers that military clerks maintained with the same attention they gave to grain shipments and weapon inventories. There are spaces in the archaeological record where holding pens once stood, areas where water was available for forced washing, sections where women's appearances could be enhanced before transport. This wasn't a battlefield. It was the intake center for a trafficking operation that extended across 3 continents. And we know it was systematic because the Romans themselves told us they wrote it down, celebrated it, put it on monuments. Polybius, one of Rome's most respected military historians, doesn't describe what happened to captive women as an unfortunate side effect of conquest. He lists it as standard protocol, part of the established methodology of Roman warfare. The Roman poet Propertius writes about defeated women with casual specificity, noting how their value increased or decreased based on documented characteristics. The Arch of Titus, still standing in Rome today, depicts Jewish captives from this very siege. And if you look carefully at how the women are positioned at the specific gestures the sculptors chose, you're looking at advertising. Visual propaganda designed to communicate that Rome doesn't just defeat its enemies, it owns them, body and womb and future. Let me take you backwards for a moment, because what happened in Jerusalem in 70 CE wasn't new, it was refined. 2.5 centuries earlier, during Rome's wars in Spain, a Gallic noblewoman named Chiomara was captured by Roman forces. She was exactly the kind of prisoner Rome prized high-status young, valuable. The centurion who held her understood her worth in the slave markets, which is why what he did next violated Roman military protocol. He raped her. Not because Roman soldiers never raped captives, but because he did it before she could be appraised and sold. He damaged valuable merchandise. The Roman military didn't object to sexual violence against captive women. It objected to sexual violence that reduced profit margins. Chiomara eventually got her revenge, ordering her freed tribesmen to kill and behead her rapist. But here's what haunts the historical record. The Romans who documented this story expressed more outrage at the centurion's violation of property protocols than at the rape itself. The system cared about efficiency, not humanity. Now jump forward to Jerusalem. The city finally falls after 5 months of siege warfare that Josephus, the Jewish Roman historian who witnessed it firsthand, describes in detail so precise it reads like an instruction manual. When the walls breach, Roman forces don't pour through in chaotic revenge. They advance in formation, controlling sectors, establishing collection points, separating populations with practiced precision. Men of fighting age are identified and executed immediately. The elderly are dispatched with brutal efficiency because they have no economic value. But women of childbearing age, they're cataloged. Roman clerks move through the ruins with wooden tablets making notes. Hair color, approximate age, signs of pregnancy, visible skills, social class markers, whether they resist or comply. All of it recorded because all of it affects market price in different regional markets that Roman traders have been supplying for centuries. Here's a detail that survives in the fragments. Pregnant women commanded premium prices in certain markets, but faced immediate sale in others, depending on regional laws about the enslavement of unborn children. The Romans had done this so many times across so many conquests that they knew which markets preferred which merchandise. Women with literacy skills like Deborah Bat-Salazar might be diverted toward wealthy Roman households seeking educated slaves who could tutor children. Women who showed particular beauty by Roman standards, specific proportions, specific features, faced specialization into concubinage or prostitution. Women deemed suitable only for labor were marked for agricultural estates or mining operations, where life expectancy was measured in months. And the children, we have to talk about what Rome did to the children, because it reveals the deepest level of imperial calculation. When Roman forces separated mothers from their children, they weren't being randomly cruel. They were preventing something specific. Roman military theorists understood that the most dangerous future enemies were the sons and daughters of defeated warriors, raised by mothers who taught them their people's language, stories, gods, and grievances. So Rome developed a systematic approach. Separate them young enough that they forget. Raise them as slaves who know only Latin, only Roman gods, only the superiority of Roman civilization. It was demographic warfare, cultural genocide with a profit motive. The logistics of moving thousands of captive women from Jerusalem to markets across the empire reveal infrastructure that could only exist through long practice. Roman military camps along established routes had specialized holding facilities. Archaeological evidence shows separate structures with specific architectural features, small windows preventing escape but allowing ventilation, central courtyards for examination and exercise that maintained physical condition, nearby water sources for the forced bathing that prepared merchandise for sale. At major crossroads, merchants who specialized in human trafficking maintained larger facilities where captives could be held for weeks, while buyers traveled from distant cities. The whole system operated with supply chain efficiency that would impress modern logistics experts. Except the product being moved and processed was human beings. We have price lists that survive from the ancient world. They're devastating to read. A skilled male slave might cost 1,500 denarii. A young woman considered attractive by Roman standards could command 6,000 denarii or more. Several years' salary for a legionnaire, but the prices fluctuated based on factors Roman traders tracked with obsessive attention. Regional oversupply from multiple simultaneous campaigns, seasonal variations in buyer activity, specific physical characteristics and fashion among wealthy Romans at particular moments. Some surviving letters between slave traders discuss captive women the way modern commodities brokers discuss pork futures, analyzing market trends and profit margins with clinical detachment that erases every trace of humanity from the transaction. The psychological dimensions of this system extended beyond the immediate victims. When Rome systematically removed the wives and mothers of defeated warriors, they were eliminating the people who maintained cultural continuity, the women who taught children their people's language, who preserved songs, stories, religious practices, healing knowledge, food traditions, everything that made a culture distinct. Roman strategists understood that you could defeat an enemy's army and they might rebuild, but if you removed the women who carried their culture forward, you could erase a people within a generation. And they did this consciously, repeatedly, across every frontier of their expanding empire. The result was demographic transformation on a scale that modern genetic studies are only beginning to map, showing patterns of population movement during the Roman period that align precisely with documented trafficking routes. There's a moment that appears in multiple ancient sources, described from different perspectives, but with consistent details that suggest it really happened. During triumphal processions in Rome, When victorious generals paraded through the city displaying conquered treasures, captive women were included in the spectacle. But they weren't just walking in chains. They were posed, arranged in specific formations, dressed or undressed, to communicate particular messages to the Roman crowd about their former status and current degradation. Women who had been nobility in their homelands wore the remnants of fine clothing, torn just enough to suggest sexual availability. Women who had been priestesses or religious leaders carried objects from their temples, but positioned to suggest theft or desecration. The whole performance was designed to transform human suffering into entertainment while communicating Rome's absolute dominance over everything these women had represented in their former lives. And here's what might be the cruelest detail in all of this. Some of these women survived for decades. We have evidence of this from unexpected sources: grave inscriptions, legal documents, references in letters where Roman household members mention aged slaves who speak with foreign accents, who sometimes use strange words from languages no one else understands, who carry behaviors that mark them as coming from somewhere else. These women lived entire lifetimes in captivity, worked in Roman households, bore children who were born into slavery, and eventually died far from the places that had been their homes, buried in cemeteries that Roman archaeologists would excavate 2,000 years later and catalog with the same clinical efficiency Rome once used to catalog living women as merchandise. The silence is what haunts me most about this story. The women themselves left almost no direct testimony, a few fragments, brief mentions in larger chronicles written by men. The archaeological evidence of their bodies and the spaces where they were processed, but their voices, their perspectives, what they felt and thought and hoped during the weeks and months and years of systematic dehumanization, that's mostly lost. We can infer, we can imagine, but we can't fully know. And that silence is itself part of what Rome did to them. Not just physical captivity, but testimonial erasure. The systematic elimination, not only of their freedom, but of their ability to bear witness to their own experience. What remains are the systems, the laws that classified them, the market mechanisms that priced them, the infrastructure that transported them, the monuments that displayed them, the literary references that treated them as props in Roman stories about Roman greatness. And when we look at those systems carefully, when we trace how they evolved over centuries of Roman expansion, we're looking at something more terrifying than random wartime brutality. We're looking at calculated methodology, refined practice, institutionalized trafficking that operated with such efficiency it became unremarkable to the Romans who implemented it. Routine administrative work, no more remarkable than collecting taxes or building roads. The legacy of what Rome did to the wives of defeated warriors extends far beyond the Roman Empire itself. The specific techniques Rome developed, the legal frameworks, the economic infrastructure, the cultural programming that normalized systematic exploitation, all of it established templates that later empires would study, adapt, and deploy. The Spanish conquest of the Americas. European colonial expansion into Africa and Asia. Modern trafficking language. The specifics differ, but the underlying logic, that conquered populations can be systematically processed into economic assets while simultaneously being prevented from reproducing their resistance. That logic traces directly back to innovations Rome perfected in places like Jerusalem in 70 CE. There's an inscription that survives in Rome, on a monument most tourists walk past without noticing. It lists, among other spoils from the Jerusalem campaign, 97,000 captives. That number appears in other sources too, suggesting it's probably close to accurate. 97,000 human beings processed through the system I've been describing, examined, cataloged, transported, sold, most of them women and children. Most of them people like Deborah Bet Elazar, who had names and families and identities that were systematically erased and replaced with commercial classifications that made them easier to exploit. The archaeological record from Jerusalem shows something unexpected in the destruction layers from 70 CE hidden caches, small spaces sealed during the siege where people tried to preserve things that mattered to them. Coins, yes, jewelry, sometimes, but also other objects, lamps, pottery, children's toys, letters, things that wouldn't have economic value to the Romans who would eventually search the ruins, but had immeasurable value to the people who hid them. And sometimes, in these caches, there are objects that could only have been hidden by women. Cosmetic implements, spindle whorls, small religious items associated with domestic life. Each one a fragment of evidence that even as Rome's systematic machinery of conquest closed around them, people tried desperately to preserve something of who they had been. The question that echoes across to millennia is this: how does a civilization become capable of such systematic cruelty? How do individual human beings, Roman soldiers and clerks and traders who had mothers and wives and daughters of their own, participate in machinery that processes other people's mothers and wives and daughters as merchandise? The answer isn't that they were monsters. The answer is that they built systems efficient enough and routine enough that individual moral responsibility dissolved into collective practice. No single person had to feel fully accountable because everyone was just following protocol, just doing their assigned part in a larger mechanism that no individual felt empowered to question or stop. And that's what makes this story so much more than ancient history. That's what makes it a warning that still matters. The brutality Rome inflicted on the wives of defeated warriors was terrible, but the systematic nature of that brutality, the way it was organized and normalized and celebrated, reveals something about how powerful societies create the machinery to dehumanize the powerless, about how efficiency and routine can make almost anything seem acceptable, about how the largest horrors in human history don't happen through sudden eruptions of chaos, but through patient, methodical, well-documented systems that reduce human beings to assets and transform their suffering into profit. In the ruins of Jerusalem, beneath layers of ash and time, archaeologists sometimes find small bones, children who didn't survive the siege, women who died before they could be processed into slavery, and sometimes they find something else. Scratches on walls, brief messages carved quickly, desperately, by people who knew they might be the last evidence they ever existed. Most are in Hebrew or Aramaic. Most say simple things, names, prayers, the word remember, over and over, carved into stone by hands that understood they might leave no other trace. Rome tried to erase them, turning people into property, stripping away memory, resistance, and identity. Yet their scratches on walls survive 2,000 years, their traces uncovered by science, their stories refusing silence. We still gather the fragments, still hear echoes of terror when soldiers hunted not warriors but generations. The empire fell, the stones cooled, but one question remains. What does it mean that humans once built such machinery of erasure and that in different forms we continue building it today?